A siege was supposed to be controlled warfare. Surround the target, cut its food, break its walls. Wait until hunger completed what artillery had started. That was the theory. In practice, siege armies launched ships into chains, marched into their own explosions, built weapons that caught fire, filled rivers with corpses, and occasionally discovered that winter had joined the opposing side. The walls were rarely the only problem. Sometimes, the plan itself was the strongest defense. Number 9. Megiddo, 1457 BCE. The victory lost to looting, Pharaoh Thutmose III entered Canaan to crush a coalition led by the ruler of Kadesh. The rebel army had gathered near Megiddo, a fortified city controlling one of the most valuable routes through the ancient Near East. Thutmose chose the most dangerous road through the Aruna Pass. It was narrow enough that his army had to advance almost single file. If the defenders had blocked the exit, the Egyptians could have been trapped inside the pass. They did not. The Egyptian army emerged, deployed, and defeated the coalition outside Megiddo. The rebel soldiers abandoned their chariots and fled towards the city walls. Megiddo's gates had already been shut. Men standing above the walls lowered clothing and ropes. The fugitives were pulled upward like cargo, while Egyptian troops approached from behind. The city was exposed. Its defeated army was still climbing the walls. A rapid assault might have ended the campaign immediately. Instead, the Egyptian soldiers stopped to loot the abandoned enemy camp. They collected decorated chariots, armor, horses, weapons, tents, and valuables. By the time order returned, the surviving rebel commanders were safely inside Megiddo. Thutmose had won the battle and lost the opportunity. The Egyptians were forced to build an enclosure around the city. The blockade lasted for roughly 7 months before hunger drove Megiddo's leaders to surrender. A campaign that might have ended in hours continued through an entire season. The Egyptians captured the enemy's possessions first. Then they had to capture the enemy. Number 8. Syracuse, 214 BCE. The fleet that attacked a mathematician. During the Second Punic War, the Roman commander Marcus Claudius Marcellus moved against Syracuse in Sicily. Rome had experienced soldiers, siege towers, artillery, and ships carrying enormous scaling devices. Syracuse had stone walls, a capable garrison, and an elderly mathematician named Archimedes. The Romans constructed a ship-mounted siege engine, later called the Sambuca. Several vessels were bound together to support a tall ladder. The device could be raised against the sea walls, allowing soldiers to climb directly onto the fortifications. It looked impressive from a distance. Archimedes had prepared artillery for several ranges. Large stone throwers struck Roman vessels while they were still far from the walls. When the ships moved closer, smaller machines fired through openings cut into the masonry. The Romans could not escape the firing zones. They merely moved from one set of weapons into another. Ancient accounts also describe heavy beams and grappling devices extending from the walls. Iron claws reportedly caught Roman ships, lifted their bows, and dropped them back into the water. The exact design remains uncertain. The effect was not. Roman crews began panicking whenever a rope or wooden beam appeared above the wall. Marcellus supposedly joked that Archimedes was using his ships like cups while beating his siege engines away from the table. The direct naval assault was abandoned. Syracuse eventually fell after a prolonged blockade and a breach during a religious festival. Archimedes was killed during the capture. Rome defeated the city. It did not defeat the mathematics. Number 7. Paris, 885 CE. The bridge made from dead bodies, a large Viking force sailed up the Seine and reached Paris in November 885. The city was concentrated mainly on the Ile de la Cité. 2 fortified bridges connected the island to the riverbanks. These bridges did more than move people. They blocked Viking ships from sailing farther upstream. The Viking leader Siegfried first attempted negotiation. He requested passage through Paris, reportedly promising not to attack the city if his fleet were allowed to continue. Count Odo refused. The Vikings attacked the bridge towers with arrows, stones, axes, fire, and siege equipment. The defenders repaired damage almost as quickly as it appeared. According to later accounts, they even raised the height of one tower during the night. The attackers then looked at the shallow channels around the island and developed a new engineering solution. They began throwing material into the river. Timber went first, then vegetation, then the bodies of slaughtered animals. Human corpses were added to the mass. The goal was to create a crude causeway across the water and reach the defenses without passing through the bridges. The river accepted the material. It did not become a road. The improvised corpse bridge shifted, separated, and failed to support the attack. Flaming boats were also sent downstream toward the fortified bridges, but the defenders prevented the fire from producing the required collapse. Heavy rains and flooding later damaged one bridge, isolating its tower. Even then, Paris continued resisting. The Vikings had converted the Seine into a floating graveyard. It remained a river. Number 6. Constantinople, 717. The army that forgot about winter. The Umayyad Caliphate prepared an enormous operation against Constantinople in 717. The objective was not a raid. It was the elimination of the Byzantine capital. A large land army crossed into Thrace while a fleet entered the surrounding waters. Constantinople was to be sealed from both directions. Without food or reinforcement, even the Theodosian walls could become irrelevant. Emperor Leo III had prepared supplies. The attackers had prepared confidence. The Byzantine navy used Greek fire against the Muslim fleet. The incendiary substance could be projected from specialized equipment and continued burning on the surface of the water. Ships gathered closely for blockade operations became convenient targets. The naval ring weakened. Then winter arrived. Snow covered the Umayyad camps. Transport became difficult. Animals died. Food stocks disappeared. Medieval sources provide extreme accounts of starvation and disease, although their largest numbers are probably exaggerated. Whatever the exact totals, the siege army suffered severely while the defenders remained behind walls with stored provisions. Relief fleets arriving from Egypt and North Africa failed to reverse the situation. Some crews defected. Byzantine ships attacked again. Supply lines collapsed. In August 718, the siege was abandoned. Storms reportedly destroyed additional vessels during the retreat. The Umayyads had surrounded one of the strongest cities in the world. Then they were surrounded by weather. Number 5. Constantinople, 1203. The harbor chain attacked from the wrong side. Constantinople's Golden Horn was protected by a massive chain stretched across the entrance to the harbor. Enemy ships could not simply sail through it. The chain was supported by floating structures and controlled from fortified points on shore. Any fleet trapped outside remained exposed to missiles from the walls and attacks from Byzantine vessels. During the Fourth Crusade, the Crusaders and Venetians needed access to the harbor. Attacking the chain directly from the water would place their ships beneath the defenders. So, they attacked the building controlling one end of it. Crusader forces landed near Galata, fought their way toward the tower, and forced the defenders away. Once control of the mechanism was lost, the chain was lowered or broken, and Venetian ships entered the Golden Horn. The Byzantine plan had treated the chain as a barrier. The Crusaders treated it as a door with a poorly protected handle. In July 1203, the attackers forced political change inside the city. The arrangement quickly collapsed. In April 1204, they attacked again and sacked Constantinople. The greatest walls in medieval Europe did not fail during the opening operation. The security system beside them did. Number 4. Gibraltar, 1782. The fireproof batteries that burned. The Great Siege of Gibraltar began in 1779 when Spain and France attempted to remove Britain from the fortress controlling the entrance to the Mediterranean. A conventional blockade failed to force surrender. British ships repeatedly delivered supplies. Land bombardment damaged buildings but did not break the defensive position. French engineer Jean-Le Michaux d'Arçon proposed a new weapon, floating batteries designed to resist both cannon fire and flames. The vessels carried heavy guns behind thick timber protection. Layers of wet sand and other materials were intended to absorb incoming shot. Water circulation systems were supposed to prevent the wooden structures from overheating. The batteries were presented as nearly unsinkable and fireproof. On September 13, 1782, 10 of them advanced against Gibraltar. British defenders fired heated cannonballs. Red-hot shot buried itself in the wooden protection. At first, the impacts appeared ineffective. The thick construction prevented immediate penetration. It also trapped heat inside the vessels. Small fires spread through spaces that were difficult to reach. Water systems proved inadequate. Ammunition began exploding. By nightfall, the floating batteries were burning across the bay, while British boats moved among them to rescue survivors. The main assault collapsed in a single day. The siege continued until February 1783, when the attackers finally withdrew. The batteries had been built to resist ordinary cannonballs. The defenders warmed them first. Number 3. Petersburg, 1864. The soldiers who charged into their own crater. By the summer of 1864, Union and Confederate forces were locked around Petersburg, Virginia. A frontal attack against fortified trenches promised heavy casualties. Soldiers from the Union's 48th Pennsylvania Infantry, many of them former coal miners, proposed another method. They would tunnel beneath the Confederate line. The soldiers dug a shaft more than 500 feet long and placed approximately 8,000 pounds of gunpowder beneath a Confederate position known as Elliott's Salient. The mine exploded before dawn on July 30. Earth, artillery, equipment, and men were thrown upward. The blast opened a crater roughly 170 feet long, as much as 80 feet wide, and around 30 feet deep. The Confederate line had been torn open. Union troops were supposed to move around the crater, seize the high ground beyond it, and widen the breach before the defenders recovered. Instead, many soldiers moved directly into the hole. The crater appeared to offer cover. Its steep sides then trapped the men inside. Units became mixed together. Officers lost control. Exits became congested. Confederate forces recovered and gathered around the rim. Artillery and rifle fire poured downward into the packed Union soldiers. A special division of United States colored troops had trained for the assault, but the plan was changed shortly before the operation. Less prepared troops led the advance instead. The black regiments were committed later, after the attack had already become disorganized. The Union suffered thousands of casualties and withdrew. The tunnel had worked, the explosion had worked. The army then used the breach as a waiting room. Number 2. Château Gaillard, 1204. The fortress entered through its plumbing. Richard the Lionheart built Château Gaillard above the River Seine in Normandy during the late 1190s. The fortress protected the approach to Rouen. It included multiple defensive enclosures, high walls, towers, ditches, and a central keep positioned above steep terrain. Richard believed the castle could resist a major royal army. He died in 1199. 4 years later, King Philip II of France surrounded the fortress. The English garrison resisted while civilians from the surrounding area crowded inside. As food became scarce, the defenders expelled many non-combatants. Some passed through the French lines. Others became trapped between the armies, where they starved in the open. Philip's troops gradually captured the outer defensive positions. Reaching the inner ward remained difficult. According to traditional accounts, a small French group investigated a structure connected to the castle's latrines or chapel. The exact route is disputed, but the attackers apparently exploited an inadequately protected opening and climbed into the enclosure. Once inside, they created noise and fire, convincing the defenders that a larger force had broken through. The garrison withdrew toward the final keep. The fortress surrendered in March 1204. Château Gaillard had cliffs, concentric defenses, fortified towers, and walls designed by one of Europe's most experienced warrior kings. Its weakest point handled sewage. Medieval engineering had defended every honorable entrance. The waste system received less attention. Number 1. Antioch, 1098. The besiegers captured the city and became the new besieged. The army of the First Crusade reached Antioch in October 1097. The city was protected by kilometers of walls, climbing across steep mountains. Hundreds of towers guarded the perimeter. The Crusaders lacked enough troops to seal every exit completely. They settled into a blockade. Winter transformed the camp. Food disappeared, horses were slaughtered, disease spread, men deserted. Foraging parties traveled farther from the walls and returned with less. Direct attacks failed. The Crusaders eventually opened secret negotiations with Firouz, a guard responsible for several towers. On the night of June 2, 1098, selected soldiers climbed ladders to his position. They entered the city, opened gates, and allowed the main army inside. Antioch fell. The Crusaders had barely begun looting when a larger Muslim relief army commanded by Kerboga of Mosul arrived. The conquerors were now trapped inside the city. They had just spent 8 months starving. The food situation did not improve simply because ownership of the walls had changed. The Crusaders controlled Antioch, but Kerboga's forces surrounded them. The citadel also remained in enemy hands. Morale collapsed. Then a Provençal cleric named Peter Bartholomew claimed that St. Andrew had revealed the location of the Holy Lance, the spear believed to have pierced Christ during the crucifixion. Men dug beneath the floor of a church. After hours of searching, Peter entered the pit and produced a piece of iron. Some Crusaders considered it a miracle. Others considered it planted evidence. Either way, The discovery gave the starving army a symbol around which to organize. On June 28, the Crusaders marched out of Antioch. Kerboga's coalition fractured during the battle, and his army withdrew. The original siege plan had succeeded through bribery. It then created a second siege against the winners. Antioch was captured twice in 1 month. The first victory caused the next emergency. Siege warfare rewarded preparation. It also punished assumptions. Megiddo survived because victorious soldiers stopped to shop. Paris watched an enemy attempt to turn cadavers into civil engineering. Constantinople allowed winter and Greek fire to dismantle an invasion. Gibraltar burned weapons advertised as fireproof. Petersburg produced a perfect explosion, followed by an assault into the hole it created. These plans were not ridiculous because their designers lacked intelligence. Most were based on recognizable military logic. A wall could be crossed. A harbor could be blocked. A defensive line could be mined. A fleet could be armored. A city could be starved. The failure appeared in the missing detail: the soldiers who looted too early, the river that refused to become solid, the heating system that failed to cool, the tunnel that created a trap for its own army, the fortress whose toilet received less protection than its gate. Every siege began with an attempt to isolate the enemy. In these 9 cases, the attackers mostly isolated themselves from common sense.